new to our work. But, oh, great. Thank you, whoever did that. So we are a nonprofit. We're based in Jackson, Wyoming, and Bozeman, Montana, and we serve Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana. And we work to advance alternative fuels in the transportation sector. And we do this by trying to connect folks with the right resources and funding opportunities and break down the barriers to using alternative fuel vehicles and fuels, such as renewable diesel. And then we also work to advance the infrastructure that's available throughout our region so that folks can use those vehicles and fuels. And then finally, we do a lot of education and outreach, whether that's to the general public or fleets, businesses, government, whoever is willing to hear from us. So that's kind of just the basics of our organization. We're a nonprofit, but we're also a program of the Department of Energy. So we're able to utilize a lot of the resources and research that we receive from the national labs. So that is our organization. And then as far as the Renewable Diesel Working Group, so Jesse Terrian, who you'll be hearing a lot from here in a moment, our project manager up in Bozeman, Montana, he came onto the team a couple years ago at this point, and he's been working really diligently to try to get renewable diesel available to fleets in our region, as well as at public stations as well, because we recognized that the fuel is getting produced nearby in our region and then getting shipped to the West Coast. And we wanted fleets in our area to also be able to have the great benefits of using renewable diesel, such as cleaner air and the greenhouse gas emissions benefits that we'll hear about a little bit more. So he's been doing a great job with that. And Jesse has a PhD in biochemistry. Is that right? I'm saying the right thing. And he also was managed a biodiesel production facility outside of Bozeman. So he has a lot of hands-on experience and academic experience. So we're fortunate to have him on board to really understand the full-on chemistry and benefits of this fuel. So with that, I think I will hand it over to Jesse now, and we'll just do, a lot of you have attended some of our info sessions already, but we do want to do just a brief basics. Yeah, our agenda really is kind of some of the background of the fuel, and then we'll go into hearing from Steve Parker, one of our board members here, who's with Jackson Hole Mountain Resort, who's currently using the fuel. So we'll have kind of a real world experience perspective. And then from there, we will go into Q&A. And we do, so this is our first meeting, but we do want to do this monthly because we think it's valuable, as opposed to having our, pocketed conversations, to really bring everybody together, those who are interested in using it, those who are using it, the fuel distributors, and even if some of the refineries are on board here, to have everybody in the same room to just bring it all together and make it happen. So thank you for being here, and I'll pass it along to Jesse.
Hello, everybody. Can you see my slideshow here? Yeah, so we've given a few of these talks for the past year, some in more detail, some very cursory overview of the fuel. So I tried to pick something in between, because I know some of you know about renewable diesel, some of you don't know much about renewable diesel. So I tried to touch on things that I thought were important. Can we mute everybody else? So let's see here. This is sort of a little overview of what I'm going to touch on. The production of renewable diesel, as Alicia mentioned, in our region, the chemical composition. I think that shows how it's different. A lot of people don't realize that it's similar and different, and I think the chemical composition shows that. The properties, how it compares to petroleum diesel. Then this is what kind of excited us this summer, was that there is public availability in our region, which is it's a new thing. Then there's, of course, carbon reduction, which is one of the main reasons we want to talk about it. Then some real world experience. We have Steve Parker from Jackson Hole Mountain Resort here. He might have some cold weather recommendations. I know that's at the forefront of his mind when he's choosing fuels. And then we just want to leave the rest of the time for discussion, some questions and answers. So production, renewable diesel is not biodiesel. I didn't have that slide here. I usually do start off by saying that it is not biodiesel. They're different. Renewable diesel is produced in the same way that petroleum diesel is produced, and in the same type of refineries, and sometimes the exact same refineries. The one on the upper left, Montana Renewables, which is owned by Calumet, is in Great Falls, and they converted half of their facility to produce renewable diesel. It requires changing a few pieces of equipment, but it's the same refinery, and half of their refinery continues to do petroleum. And the other refineries in our region, we have one in Dickinson, North Dakota. There are two in Wyoming. The one in Dickinson, and I think both in Wyoming, only produce renewable diesel. And I also think both or all three of those were converted from petroleum refineries. They aren't building many new ones. It's typically converting existing petroleum refineries over. So in January of 2022, on the top left, you can see the states that had renewable diesel refineries, and there were only 6 of them, one in North Dakota and one in Wyoming. So our region has been there since the beginning. In the last year, we've had 8 new plants come online, notably the one in Great Falls and the other one in Cheyenne, Wyoming. And I've shown the other 6 that are here. There may be more scheduled. This data was from late last year. And in the background there, you can see the graph. The dark green is production in thousands of barrels per day, and then the light green is the expected increase in production. So you can see by 2025, it's expected to double the production. And then you can also see in the early 2010s, there's almost no production. So that's partly why I think we haven't heard about it much. It hasn't been available. There hasn't been much of it, but in the last couple of years, there's quite a bit. And last year, it surpassed the production of biodiesel. So biodiesel seems to be on its way out, and renewable diesel is taking over. This was the chemical comparison. So on the left, there's petroleum diesel, which is a complex mixture of hydrocarbons, and they range in carbon chain lengths of C8 to C25 on average. And I've tried to illustrate that here. And then on the 25% are aromatic hydrocarbons. So they're cyclic hydrocarbons, and those typically, I think, can be associated with toxicity and dirty and toluenes, and they're not nice chemicals. And that's 25% of petroleum diesel on average. Then the remaining are, I think, what they call paraffins. They're just linear. They're not always perfectly linear like that. They can be branched, but they are paraffins, and that makes up 75% of petroleum diesel typically. Now, renewable diesel is, as you see on the right, a much narrower form of these paraffins, typically maybe C15 to C19. So they're very specific, and there aren't any of these toxic aromatic hydrocarbons. So not only is the fuel cleaner, when you combust these two fuels, you will see a difference. When you burn aromatic hydrocarbons, you get all kinds of bad, dirty, toxic byproducts. And that's partly why you see so much soot from old diesel engines. Renewable diesel does not produce nearly that kind of pollution. Renewable diesel is, life cycle emissions are, they say up to 75% fewer emissions for life cycle emissions. And bulk of that is from the fact that the feedstocks are renewable, but the fuel also does burn cleaner. And these are some pictures. I'm trying to work on getting a nice picture. There are a couple sets of these floating around, but I want to have our own. So on the left, you can see some petroleum diesel. This was sent to me by Marathon, the refinery, Dickinson, North Dakota. And then on the right, you see renewable diesel. That's from Dickinson, North Dakota. The petroleum diesel, I think, is somewhere else in North Dakota. It's one of Marathon's other refineries. The exact same setup on both sides, but you can see on the left how much dirtier petroleum diesel burns than renewable diesel. So there's the chemistry, the chemical visual you can see with the molecules I made, but you can also actually see it firsthand very easily how much dirtier it is. And this is the main reason why you can see improvements in or reductions in maintenance needs for diesel vehicles. A lot of what I understand fleets deal with is diesel exhaust fluid, DPF issues, emission issues. That's what usually triggers the check engine lights on a lot of these heavy duty equipment. And that's because the fuel is dirty and it's clogging the filter or whatever it might be. So with renewable diesel, there are many fleets that have quantified this, but there is a savings in maintenance and it can be significant. The properties of renewable diesel versus petroleum diesel and biodiesel just happens to be here in the middle. But one of the main benefits of renewable diesel in terms of performance is the increased cetane, so a more efficient, effective combustion of the fuel. So that's one advantage renewable diesel has. The sulfur is a little bit lower, or it's about the same as petroleum diesel, so no real gains there. The NOx emissions are a little bit better, but what's interesting is the oxidative stability. So that's the second or third to last. Renewable diesel has great stability for storage. It doesn't seem to absorb as much water. So both the tanks and the filters on the tanks and the filters on the vehicles tend to last a lot longer and clog a lot less. Cold flow properties, it says, are excellent here for renewable diesel. That can be the case. It can also be a lot worse than petroleum diesel. It all depends what the refinery is designing the fuel for. They can make a renewable diesel that works great to -40. But as Alicia alluded to earlier, most of the fuel produced in our region and across the country goes to the West Coast, primarily California. So there's no need to optimize this fuel for cold weather. Some producers are considering it, but I think the demand is just so high where it's warm. There's no monetary drive for them to change it. But so that's a long way of saying that it can be better than petroleum diesel in terms of cold flow properties. It can be worse. So you have to know which renewable diesel you are using. So the public availability, these little pink orangish dots here, this is from the Alternative Fuel Data Center. It's a federal government website showing where you can get all different kinds of fuels. So until late last year, the only dots were in Oregon and California. So there are, I think, over 500 public stations in California where you can buy renewable diesel and half dozen in Oregon. And that was it for the whole country. And then working with Parkland Fuels, we were able to get it at a station here in Belgrade. And they were selling R50, so 50% renewable diesel. Shortly after, Conrad Bischoff in Idaho made it available at their stations in Nampa, and that's owned by Parkland as well. That was partly why it was easily deployed there. And then almost simultaneously, we got it in Jackson, Wyoming. This is through them as well at a Shell station. So we've got ours. They converted the tank back to #1 diesel for the winter. So I'm hoping in the spring, when there's less demand for #1 diesel, we'll get renewable diesel back in there. But we also have a couple other fuel distributors with public stations that may consider putting it in their #1 tanks in the summer. Of course, this is public availability for, I put it in my truck, so any diesel vehicle can use it, and this is where you could fill up. But fleets who order fuel in bulk can definitely order it without having any stations available. It's available in our area. This is just one kind of overarching theme I try to push on, and I'd like to simplify this at some point, but I think it illustrates the effectiveness of renewable diesel in reducing carbon emissions. So if you bear with me, I'll try and get through this sort of quickly. On the left, I just have a fleet of 10 vehicles, and I have the assumptions on the left there, far left. 10 trucks, 10 miles per gallon per truck, 20,000 miles per year, 20,000 gallons per year per fleet. At $4 a gallon, I know diesel's probably a little less around here now, that's $80,000 of fuel. So that's the first scenario I have. middle scenario is that same situation, but we replace one of those 10 trucks with an electric truck. So you're reducing your emissions by 10% because you removed an internal combustion truck and you get replaced it with an EV. Of course, that's assuming the electricity is emission free, and it's a bunch of other assumptions that aren't necessarily true, but for simplicity, that's what I did. And then that truck's going to cost money to replace. I'm going to say $200,000 more over 10 years is $20,000 a year. So for that middle scenario, replacing one of your diesel trucks with an electric truck, you can reduce your emissions by 10%. And the cost is about $12,000. On the far right is the same fleet as we have, the original fleet, just using renewable diesel. Renewable diesel has approximately a $1 per gallon premium. So with all those assumptions, we can say that $20,000 will be it'll be increase of $20,000 in your fuel costs that year, but the reductions in emissions will be 75%. So the dollar per percentage of emission reductions in the middle scenario with one EV, you're paying $1,200 to reduce your emissions every percent. For renewable diesel, it's $270 per percent. So per dollar, renewable diesel is much more effective in carbon reduction than EVs. It's not to say you shouldn't do EVs, you probably should simultaneously, but this is an immediate deployable option we have that will reduce much more significantly than replacing some of your fleet with electric vehicles. And of course, there's no operational changes. So same pumps, same fuel filters, same mechanics, same trucks, same everything. Well, that's it. That's all I have for the overview. And so I would open it up. Well, I guess maybe we should hear from Steve. That could follow what they've been doing in Jackson at Jackson Hole Mountain Resort. Steve, you want to give us a little overview?
Yeah. We started using renewable this summer. I actually got a R99. I got, I put my system into 50%, so R50, and ran it through the summer. We mainly, use number 2 fuel. So I, had 6,000 gallons of fuel in my tank. I got 6,000 gallons of R99. I took some samples from it because I wanted to do some testing. So we ran through the summer. We ran a lot of yellow iron for the projects we have in the summer. And then, by the time we started getting cold, I, got my fuel down to where it was, zero renewable. I sent a 10% blend. I use B&G fuel added DFC. I've been using that stuff for 16 or 17 years and never had a problem with it. It figures out to be about $90, $95 a gallon for that, but it treats 1,000 gallons. And I use that. I put number 2, our, red diesel with our B&G and 10% of that R99. We sent it to a B&G guy up in Belgrade, Cliff White. He tested it to be good to minus 41 degrees. So immediately I put 10% fuel in my tanks out here, and that was probably first part of December. We get, fuel pretty much every 8 to 10 days, 7,500 to, 6,000 to 7,500, depending on the snowcats. And these are all for snowcats. We don't, a little bit of, it's pretty much a little bit of yellow iron that gets running around on the base here, but it's all, we use quite a bit of fuel with the 12 mainline groomers that run on the hill all winter long. So that's kind of what we do. I feel pretty confident with the 10% blend at 41 below. If you have any questions about that B&G stuff, I think that's the best stuff that they have. I'm not sure. There's a bunch of other brands out there, but with me using it as long as I have, I'm pretty confident with it. What else would you want to know?
Steve, I would have a question. Having run it that long, I would think you may have seen some changes in your maintenance schedules on those vehicles, but at R10, maybe you don't.
Well,
say
not
about
much.
that?
I'm hoping, you know, in the spring when things I know in the future when it's not going to get really cold, I'm going to bump it up, you know, 20-30%. And you know, we're paying, you know, through Parkland Conrad, it's $4.60 a gallon. So 10%, you know, you're getting, you know, 750 gallons here and there. And they have that tank of renewable right on site there in Idaho Falls. So I know it'd be nice if the price was a lot cheaper, but as it is, that's what we're going to get. If we maybe get more people using it around here, then maybe the price will get down cheaper. I'm not sure where they get their fuel from, but so far it's been good. I really haven't noticed anything, but you know, with our maintenance of our snowcats, we'll notice if there's any high soot or anything. That's what you're going to see. We do an oil sample on our cats every 500 hours on our engine and our hydraulics. And, you know, we'll see if there's any, you know, if the soot stays low all winter long, that's going to tell us a lot, but at 10%, it's hard to tell. And it's harder to tell in the summer. You know, I'm still going to run probably a 50% blend in the summer. Not probably going to go 100% just because of lubrication and things like that. Because, you know, it doesn't have as near the lubrication. The B&G will add some of it, but I'm not sure it's enough. So, but yeah. Any other questions? Did I answer your question, Jesse?
Yeah, that was good. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Steve, if I understand you correctly, you're adding 10% renewable diesel in the winter.
Yep.
And 50% in the summer.
Yeah, that's what we did last summer. Yep, that's what we're going to do. Is
mixing them with regular diesel.
Mixing it with number 2. We don't ever use number 1. That B&G additive makes it so I never have to use number 1, which isn't near as efficient fuel as just straight number 2. But yeah, it's what my plan is.
Okay.
I ran it this summer. You know, there's a lot of equipment on the hill that, you know, generators and lifts and all that stuff that need fuel. So I have to grab it from our fuel. So they have to get it down to where it's going to be good for, you know, 30, 40 below. So in the fall, I usually get it to where they can start drawing it and use it on mountain, you know, generators and diesels they have up there. We actually have a snowcat that lives up at, you know, 10,450 and the fuel's outside and it's got the renewable in it. But we're pretty sure at 40 below that we should be good up there. It's about a 5% blend up there. It's not a total 10%. Any other questions?
I have something that I'm hoping folks wouldn't mind taking a moment to do. I meant to ask this earlier when I did the intro, but if you wouldn't mind in the chat writing who you're with, your organization, and then maybe what barriers you're seeing to using renewable diesel for your organization. And then even if you have a ballpark number of the amount of fuel you potentially could use, Bailey, our project manager, is going to capture this information because, as Steve mentioned, perhaps if there's enough of us using this fuel in similar locations, the price could go down as well. And then we can make some better connections here. So, but carry on with more questions.
Steve, you may have said this, but do you have a tank of pure R99 and then you're doing these blends yourself on site?
No. Conrad has it on their site in Idaho Falls. They bring it blended in their truck. We get, you know, we have a 15,000 gallon tank for number 2, you know, red diesel. So no, we don't blend it. I wish I had that capability, but no.
Okay, understood.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
think the renewable diesel storing 100% in cold temperatures, you would have some issues. And part of that is because winter additives are not effective with renewable diesel. So you can add a typical additive that would help you get that cold flow property, but they don't work with renewable products. My understanding is there are a few companies looking into it. Matt Luke is here from Neste. Actually, he's mentioned they've been looking at it for a while, but that's something everyone has to know, that additives don't work the same with renewable diesel.
That's why I was really apprehensive about, running any more than, before I tested it. So I was pretty confident with Cliff's process. They use dry ice and they, go lower and lower until it finally clouds up to a point where it clog a filter. So they do a good job of testing up there.
And that's something I've mentioned to others. They do this in Vancouver, Washington. One of their fleet managers has a -40 freezer that he has in his office, and he puts the fuel in there when he gets it. So he knows firsthand. They might tell him it's good to a certain temperature, but he can actually see it. And then he can dilute it as he wants, and he can visually have confirmation to the effectiveness of the additives or the blend that he's using. I was going to share this poll. I've not done polls before, but does this poll show up for people to answer?
Yeah, we're good.
I see it.
I'm curious just to see, maybe get some feedback that way.
I don't see a way to actually answer the poll, but I do.
Okay, well that's not helpful. Let's see here.
Maybe that's because I'm on the web version, not the. Oh, there you go. Oh, I answered, but now I got a polling error.
Well, it's my first time I'm learning here, so
Oh, I
appreciate.
it.
So I'm looking at the comments here. Matt is from Neste, and he's been the most knowledgeable person I've run into in the last 2 years about renewable diesel. I can bounce some pretty high-tech questions, and he has an answer. And he says sulfur for renewable diesel should be near zero. Yeah, that was probably referring to my comparisons specs. So it depends on the feedstocks, and there's no sulfur in the feedstocks, so there's no sulfur in the emissions of renewable or the fuel itself, renewable diesel. And then he also mentioned this is something Steve mentioned about the lubricity. Renewable diesel has to meet the same standards as petroleum diesel for lubricity. That's not to say that it has less lubricity than number two, but it has to meet all the same specs. So it is the same as petroleum diesel. It meets all the same specs. But petroleum diesel might have more. Sometimes I think they put additives, lubricity additives at the rack.
Steve, do you see you guys like maybe in the summer, are you going to ramp up over time and try and get to 100% renewable, or you think you'll always kind of stay at mixing it?
I'll probably mix it just because of the trying to get it ready for the fall and winter blend. It's tougher. We don't use near as much fuel in the summer with projects, and so I don't want to be there and have to hurry. It'll probably stay at 50, and maybe things might change. I hope the price goes down.
Yeah, that's why I think Parkland decided in Belgrade anyway to offer R50. It was a cost thing. Customers maybe would accept 50% premium for the renewable blend, but dollar premium, people might be more hesitant. So blends are often chosen for the costs.
Yeah, number one is pretty high too. It's probably about the same cost as renewable, but I don't like using number one if I can help it.
I'm noticing a couple questions in the chat. One is, how long have you been using renewable diesel, Steve?
Well, since June
Okay.
of 23.
And then another question is, can you blend with number one diesel?
Sure. Yeah, it probably just gives you a better, lower cloud, so you can get better. But, I'm really confident with that additive I use, and I never use number one in my off-road fuel.
I guess maybe this is a question for Matt. It does seem like the cold weather concern is a factor for a lot of folks, and Steve is overcoming this with a blend of 10% renewable diesel. So is there kind of a good blend level that you think that folks could utilize through winter and then bump it up to in the summer? I see Steve has, landed on 10 and then going up to 50, but is there another kind of scenario that you would recommend as well?
So real quick, Matt, Luke from Neste here. So there's no hard and fast rule of thumb here. Every producer of renewable diesel will make a different cloud point product. I can speak for ours specifically. In the winter coming to the US, our cloud point is -4 Fahrenheit. And below that, your only option, like Jesse mentioned, the additives, the cold flow improvers do not work chemistry wise with renewable diesel. So if you put a cold flow improver additive in renewable diesel, it's not going to bond up to the molecules correctly. It's just going to precipitate to the bottom of the tank and kind of go away. So what you end up with is a blend of your fossil diesel and the renewable diesel at that point. So we would say use a #1 diesel as your cold flow improver additive, and say your renewable diesel is -4 Fahrenheit cloud and your fossil diesel is -40 Fahrenheit cloud. You're basically going to get a linear line between those 2 points. So 50% blend will put you halfway between -4 and -40. You can get really precise and go down to single digits and decibels if you want to, unnecessary, kind of just rule of thumb, draw a line between the 2 cloud points, and that's your blend curve.
So if you do rely on additives, you're going to have that petroleum fraction there for the additive to work, and it'll only improve the cold flow properties of that portion. So 50% #2 should really only add 50% the additive, and it will get that fraction down to where you want. And then again, a linear relationship as you blend it.
Yeah, in that sense, additive being a #1 diesel, not an actual cold flow improver from one of the manufacturers. Yeah.
So is it not linear then if you have a #2 with an additive?
No, #2 versus #1, it's all the same, right? It's just the neat renewable diesel cloud point and then the fossil component cloud point, draw a line between the two. So I guess in the terms of spec for ASTM D975 spec, there's a window for #1 and a window for #2 with a slight overlap. So we kind of use the terms differently, but it's the same, right? It's a hydrocarbon diesel fuel. So whether you call it #1 or #2, it's fossil diesel. So just take the cloud of your fossil diesel and the cloud of your renewable diesel, connect the 2 dots, and that's your blend curve. Or that's kind of your cloud point line, right?
And I've spoken with Marathon Fuels in Dickinson, North Dakota. I've spoken with Calumet in Great Falls, and I haven't been able to reach either refinery in Wyoming, but they all tell me their specs are their fuel is destined for California, and that's the spec they're trying to make the fuel for that climate, and they have no desire yet to make it better for the winter product. Calumet in Great Falls produces SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuel, which is essentially just a fossil diesel, and that would be a great winter diesel product. But the incentives in California are even greater for that product, so likelihood of us burning that in an on-road vehicle is expensive, and it's not available yet. But that could be an option in the future. A little bit of that in there would be like a really effective #1 blend.
Yeah, and I think just real quick to tag onto that, you're right. Most of the producers out there are producing for California. Even the winter spec that they make is, I would say, more intended for SoCal, maybe NorCal, definitely not in the mountains. We're talking cloud points in the positive 20s, maybe 30s. So like Steve was saying, some sort of blend in the winter months, if you're not in those more temperate areas, is definitely the safe bet until you at least have an understanding of what you're getting and what you need.
Leah with the city of Helena asked about cold weather concerns. I think we're touching on those. The availability, so through Parkland at least, it's available. Stillwater Mine over here south of Big Timber has been using it for years, so they've been getting it. We can get it. I think Parkland is bringing it in through Idaho Falls, so there's trucking from there. It comes by rail to there. But Marathon in North Dakota, they're open to anybody. They're selling to anybody via truck or rail. So Eastern Montana, maybe northeastern Wyoming could source the fuel from Marathon, and that's another option. And then the 2 refineries in Wyoming, I think, are both rail only, but I don't know for sure. I think that's where the fuel we're getting might be coming out of, is Wyoming. And then the price increase for the last year, we've been telling people it's about $1 more per gallon, R99 versus number 2 diesel. So if you blend it, of course, it's going to be 50% increase in price, but that's ballpark price, and that fluctuates with RINs and other credits in California. They just need to make up the difference down there. There's no difference for the price down there, but for us, we have to make up that difference, and that's why we pay the premium.
And here in Jackson, if folks have the ability or to fuel at a public station, as Jesse mentioned, it's available at the Shell station in town, but for whatever reason, it's only 10 cents more for renewable diesel there than it is a traditional diesel fuel. So
I think that's R50, right?
and it's, yeah, currently.
that's-
I'll check in to see if they've lowered it. They had intentions to do that, and I would imagine with the weather at the current moment, they probably have.
Because that's really inexpensive compared to what everyone else, maybe that's their intention or whatever it might be, but that's a pretty good price, I think.
Jesse, I had a question. Have you heard anybody talk about like voiding warranties on new vehicles by blending fuels?
Yeah, that's come up, and it does not void the warranties. I think Cummins recently explicitly included it, but it shouldn't matter because I think the warranties say fuel has to meet ASTM standard XXX, and this fuel does. So it's an accepted fuel. And in Europe, they call it, what is it, hydrotreated vegetable oil, HVO, and that's a term used over there. So if you want to learn more, sometimes that's a good term to use when searching. But that's included in a lot of manufacturer warranties. I think it says HVO explicitly. We had Bonnie there's 2 big groomer manufacturers, not Piston Bully, but the other one. We had them on the call from Europe earlier this fall, explaining they've been using it for almost a decade, and it's approved on all their machines, and it's fine. I think they use Cummins engines, but yeah, I think it's a concern people have. But as long as it meets that ASTM standard, it's essentially a diesel fuel.
Yeah, Jesse, if I can jump in real quick. Prior to Neste, I was an engineer at Cummins for a long time, so I work with all the OEMs still. Cummins, Detroit, Cat, MTU, all of them have statements out there somewhere on the web if you want to search. Sometimes they're buried in owner's manuals, sometimes they're actual big press releases and conferences, but we don't know of any OEM out there that's actually said do not use renewable diesel, because like Jesse said, it meets the same spec as is required by any other diesel fuel in the US.
So some of that confusion probably has arisen from biodiesel has its own specs, its own ASTM standards, because it's a different fuel altogether. So it has its own specs, and in that case, I think you'd want it explicitly to say its warranties covers use of B20. In fact, those Fords 5 years ago were all designed to run on B20. They've got a badge on the side, but that fuel is different specs. But renewable diesel is exactly the same.
Yeah, and that was one of the reasons that Stillwater Mine switched over to renewable diesel, because they had been using biodiesel, but the blend level of bio that they needed for the air quality required in the mine voided the warranty of their vehicles. But then switching to renewable diesel enabled them to have the air quality benefits that they needed and high blends or whatever blend of renewable diesel it is that they're using right now.
I think they're using R70, and they've been using that for a couple of years now. There's a question about the usability of building generators with underground tanks. Yeah, anywhere you use diesel, you can use renewable diesel, and it's just a superior fuel pretty much all around. Everything about it's better. Other than the cost.
Sorry, Jesse, can I jump in one more time?
Yeah.
One good thing to note about generators and things, the stability of renewable diesel is incredible compared to fossil, and especially to biodiesel. So it doesn't really want to break down. It doesn't want to turn into the sludges and the acids and collect water and other stuff. We make the fuel globally. We've got some stuff that we made 18 years ago over in Europe that we keep stored and we test every year, and it hasn't changed in 18 years. And we have a huge market component coming toward us now from backup data centers and you know, power gen and hospitals and things because of those storage properties.
I'm wondering if Jesse or maybe Matt knows the renewable diesel that we can get locally. Do you know what the feedstocks are for that? And does that affect the carbon emissions that, you know, benefits that you get from it?
Yeah, the life cycle carbon emissions do change depending on the feedstocks, and California has a pretty good, really complicated database that'll actually give you the carbon intensity for each fuel, depending on feedstocks and where the refinery is, and they can get really granular there. Calumet published, and I have it, came across a slide yesterday, what their anticipated feedstocks were when they opened, because they know what's grown in our region. But I think it changes based on market price. Small fraction will be used cooking oil. Neste might use a lot more. I know they buy quite a bit of used cooking oil. So it changes from batch to batch. It's life cycle carbon intensity, but you can find some of that out. And I think once they dial a refinery in, they're going to stick with that for a while, because I think it takes some work to modify based on the feedstock.
And one follow-up to that, do you know how much of it is really things that are a waste product compared to something that is grown specifically for the purpose, you know, for the purpose of turning into fuel?
I think Calumet uses zero waste cooking product because they don't have their pre-treatment plant ready. Because so when they get the used cooking oil, they have to make sure it meets the specs they need to run into their refinery. So they are in the process of doing that. I think one of the two refineries in Wyoming has that pre-treatment processing plant, so they would have that number. But as far as I know, Montana refinery does not use any renewable. They plan to. They're getting things started. So it'll change, and I think it can never. I don't think it can ever be a large portion because there's only so much used cooking oil. But Matt would know. Well, he might know. I know Neste buys literal boatloads of it and ships it all over the world. So
yeah, I can only speak for us. We kind of choose to go the other way and not get into any food versus fuel or whatever else. So for any Neste owned facility, we're actually, as of the end of 22, we were 95% waste and residue, with the goal of being 100% by the end of 23. And we're barely into 24, so I don't know if we actually hit it, but our goal is to be pure waste and residue. So like Jesse mentioned, we're hard focused on the used cooking oils and animal fats and other stuff, as opposed to plant-based, unless it's one of the cover crops, what we call novel vegetable oils and other stuff.
And I know Idaho National Lab, Tad can't be here today, but he's one of, Tad Pearson is the fleet manager there, and he's a board member of ours. He's been using renewable diesel for quite a while. And I know previous to that, they were using biodiesel. And I know he wrote into their contract, the contracting language, the type of fuel beyond, or more specifics about the fuel that they wanted to procure. I know for biodiesel, there's a certificate, BQ 9000 or something along those lines that they required. And so that enabled him to know where the source of that fuel was coming from. So I'm curious if maybe there's an opportunity to write that language into contracting for renewable diesel to ensure that the fuel provider is procuring fuel that is primarily using sources that are as emission beneficial as possible.
I know Calumet had an announcement in Great Falls a couple months back that they are now able to use camelina, a crop grown on the shoulder years up in this northern climate. And so it competes less with food products and enables farmers to produce more in a given year. And I don't know if they're doing that yet, but they announced that was one of their goals.
I noticed in the comments there was a question about maintenance. I know we covered that a little bit, but I know, Jesse, you've had some conversations with some of the fleets in the Northwest that have seen incredible benefits maintenance-wise. So if anybody wants to expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I forgot his last name. Chuck runs the emergency fleets in Vancouver, Washington, and we have, if you look on our page, ytcleancities.org, and go to the biodiesel and then resources, you can see the clip I've pulled out of him just talking about the maintenance benefits, and I think it was about five hours per vehicle per month in measurable maintenance reduction. They have a fleet of 11 or something. They've used it for a few years, and that was mainly from the emissions related maintenance they require. So for him especially, there's measurable savings in maintenance. And I think he said he was changing his fuel filters every other week, and then it had been 6 weeks since since we were talking, and he said he hadn't changed it yet. 6 months versus every other week for fuel filters. Well, if there's no other questions, maybe we can wrap it up, and I hope to see some of you again next month. Maybe we'll have new users, new people interested, and spread the word, because things are changing. We didn't mention it, but Big Sky also committed to R99 initially, and some big public announcements, but I think they've pulled back and they're doing R50. Amy's not on the call, but hopefully they'll be here next week or next month and can tell us how they've been doing it. They put the renewable in all their tanks, so they're not excluding anything. Everything diesel runs on the renewable blend. So that'll be good to see how that's working. That'll be something new we can hear about next week.
And
I
we'll
personally use it, but I have no maintenance that I noticed changed.
And hopefully Tad will be able to join us as well. He uses R99 and 85 motor coaches that transport staff through to the desert site every day. So he currently doesn't use a blend level in the winter that we're aware of, but he uses a high level in the summer. So that'll be a different scenario to explore as well. And we'll make sure to follow up with everybody who registered with a lot of these resources and links that we mentioned. Jesse's produced quite a bit, great handouts with the facts. So,
any other questions? Great. Well, thank you everybody for attending, and we can see some of you again next month. Reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
you.
Thanks.
thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
When we end it, will everything in the chat, does that get saved as well since we were recording, or do you have to take screenshots of it?
I think that I don't think the chat gets saved, but I can screenshot it.
There's a lot. I feel like it will take like a few scrolls. I don't know if you need some help with that or.
We're just waiting for everyone to leave first and the recording, but make this bigger. I would just take pictures of it on my phone real quick.
Well then, Jesse, I think that went well.
I think that
Yeah, I felt like it was maybe a bit short in the beginning, but that's.
I think everyone seemed interested though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like the content that you covered was perfect. To that amount of time kept people interested and engaged. I mean, I've myself, I've seen your presentation before, but I was still like following along. I feel like sometimes if you do that sort of thing,